terms of what happened. Number one, is that true? But number two, my question is, are you going to be able to answer why the guy did it?
Well, I'll answer your second question first, and the answer to that is no. At this point, it's no, and I don't see anything changing in the near future that would change my statement. The other piece, yes, we're close to releasing the complete investigative report. I anticipate the end of July for that release. You know, and people, you got to give me some deference. It may be a week or two, you know, here or there. But we're in close proximity of that release.
Now, you think about the night of the event, and I think I speak on behalf of most people here in this town in saying that we applaud your efforts. You had some difficult press conferences that night. I watched all of them, as I'm sure you did, Jeff. There was, in the weeks that followed, however, some criticism about the department's reluctance to release public information. Can you explain your position on that? And now it is being released, we should say, but give us your thoughts on that.
Well, it's being released on the heels of a court battle. And, you know, people question my position on that. Why did it need to go to court for this release? And, you know, and I've been pretty proud of my transparency under my tenure as your sheriff. But there's some give and take associated with transparency, especially in law enforcement. And we have never made it a matter of practice to release an investigative file prior to the completion of the investigation. Because there's leads coming to and fro. There's, you know, all the ones that we had in place that we have to run to ground. There's a lot of nuances and moving parts, especially in an investigation of this breadth. And it's our position and our normal practice that we do not release that information until the investigation has been, per se, completed. But on the other hand, I understand the people's zest for the information, and we want to be public in what we do, and people want to understand what took place, because there's nothing bigger than, in our history, probably in our timeline, other than 1 October. But there's some nuances. One is it's a continued investigation. We have still a lot of outstanding leads out there that we have to follow up on. And then two, it's, and I've said it publicly and I'll say it here with you, there's a huge cost associated with this. So part of the court battle was reimbursement for the cost associated with the release of this information. That wasn't made public, but I'll make it public here. It's a big deal. And then I had to remove detectives as part of their normal day-to-day operations and sequester them in a secure facility and go through all the information that we received, reference 1 October, and do the redaction and compile the release and all that goes along with it. And I'm comfortable saying that's around 20 people, and that's taking them from their daily duties. Investigating crime, responding to crime, handling dispatch calls. And all that information would have been released in due time, but the court forced this upon us. Well, you know, an example was used quite often, well, it didn't take this long to get the Parkland information. Well, that's apples and oranges. The size of this event, the investigative nuances of this event, the people that were victimized associated with the event. And then that brings me to another piece. You know, it's very difficult for me in my position to re-victimize the victims, the families, and the people that were involved in that. And now this information becomes public, and they go through that. It would have happened eventually, but we're still in close proximity of that.
The criticism, I've heard two veins of criticism. I want to give you just a chance to respond again. The sheriff is delaying releasing the information to either cover up the missteps of Metro, that's number one, or the sheriff is delaying release of information to either cover up for missteps on MGM Resort's part. What do you say to that criticism of people who believe that?
Well, I would push back extremely hard on that. Neither one of them are accurate, or there's no integrity associated with either one of those statements. I would not, I don't have the ability to do that in my position. There's a requirement via law and the transparency that I have alluded to in my campaign. That information, once I'm able to do it properly and timely, it will be released. No, it is what it is. You can't hide anything in today's age. I'm very proud of our response as a police department, and I'm a little offended by those statements, and I've heard them, and it's not because you said it, it's because it's out there.
We're a conduit for what we hear, frankly.
But Metro, I'm very proud to say they did a very, very good response to this particular incident. Nobody could particularly train for this exact scenario. Nobody could envision this scenario, and the response that we did as a police department and every other public safety agency throughout the valley, the response we did, it's being held up as best practice. And now, I hired from the human race. I have 1,000 moving parts. Is there going to be questionable response by certain individuals? Yeah, but that's all part of it. We don't know how people react under duress. And that's all part of it. Not everybody is absolutely perfect when it comes, when they're put in the position of duress.
We go back and learn from areas.
And the second part, I want to address the second part, the MGM. No, I heard in the media a couple times that the reason why we were delaying it is because the MGM has given me millions of dollars in my political campaign. The MGM hadn't given me anything. So people don't do their research associated. The MGM, I'm not in the pocket of any casino company. They're part of our fabric of our economy. I interact with them on a daily, weekly basis as part of being the head of a law enforcement agency, and that would be malpractice per se if we were in concert or covertly doing something with the particular private entity that's involved in a critical incident.
Okay. I think we're headed to a break now. We're going to have much more from Sheriff Joe Lombardo coming up right after this.
And welcome back, Gerard and Jeff, along with Sheriff Joe Lombardo. We're talking October 1st. Again, we're going to get onto some other stuff, Sheriff, but you were talking, I got a two-parter real quick. You were saying you're still getting leads in, interested what some of those might be, number one. But number two, when you look back at that evening, you say that you're proud of how the department responded. Looking back, anything you'd change? What would you tweak? Obviously, it was a learning experience for Metro also. What would you do differently? Heaven forbid it never happens again, but what would you do differently?
Well, the first question is, we are still, I wouldn't say it's nowhere near as the early parts of the investigation and the number of leads that are coming in, but your question in the earlier segment is are we going to find a reason why, or is there additional suspects, or anything that goes along with any investigation? And the answer I gave you was no. But there's still people that would come in and say, hey, I met Mr. Paddock at some point, and he said this, or I saw Mr. Paddock in some gun store and he was purchasing this. And so those type of disparate little leads are trickling in still, and we have to run those to ground and make sure that we can paint a complete picture, like in any investigation, to determine the motive, any co-conspirators, and everything else that goes along with it. Marilou Danley, the other individual involved with this, his girlfriend, there's still some outstanding questions reference her actions prior to the event, and the behavioral analysis piece, determine the mindset of the suspect. That's in the auspice of the FBI.
I mean, at this point,
that won't be released until later in the year.
At this point, just a loner, obviously angry, but I mean, loner and angry. I mean, that's what we got at this point, right?
Yeah, and I've alluded to his mental state at the time of the incident, and there was some information that we believed that his mental state was degrading, and the exact nuances or the nomenclature or the science behind the exact situation of that, I'm not privy to, but I believe that to be part of it.
Yeah. Sheriff, I want to transition into...
Did you want to answer the other question?
No department will have something bigger than that, probably.
Right.
What would you do differently?
And how was our response, and what would we do different? Well, let me personalize it first. Is, in my compelling position to inform the public, to ensure their safety, and having them informed that there was some outstanding suspect there, or it was some nefarious big group of people that are intended to create harm in the future or in the near future of that incident. I wanted to get that information out sooner than later. So there was some nuances associated with the timeline, and I was criticized because of the changing of the timeline during, you know, subsequent press conferences. You know, that was information come from disparate locations, disparate databases, and I gave the admonishment early on, my failure to not repeat the admonishment early on when I publicly said, hey, this is a dynamic event, the information, the facts, and everything else is going to change over time. But I didn't repeat that every time, so it got forgotten in the early throes of the first couple press conferences, so people thought I was not being honest or transparent or you know, telling stories, which in fact that wasn't the case. The case is it's dynamic, it's changing, and it had no effect on our response or our investigation.
Could officers have gotten there sooner?
No, I believe their response was robust. I believe it was timely and it was of quality. Now you have to remember those officers were staged across the street. They were taking live rounds from an individual on 32nd floor that we know now, and it was very difficult to determine where it was coming from. Their primary concern for the safety of the people that were being victimized and the safety of themselves. Yeah. And then subsequently there's argument amongst the naysayers that, well, it took them 70 minutes to breach the door. Well, that's because the firing had stopped. And so they were properly evaluating it. There was no more immediate threat. And, you know, our officers have concern for their safety too upon entry of that door. Is there 20 people behind the door going to be firing upon them as they enter? Once it was determined that it seemed to be stable, not knowing the situation of the suspect, they then eventually breached the door. But the initial response, the clearing of the hallways, and determining where the suspect was, and everything they did alongside, I'm very proud of them, and I'll back their play till the cows come home.
There were many heroes that night, no question, and many within your department